the red button and say good evening and welcome. We are here this evening because we're all very concerned about the situation in the Holy Land. I'm Marion Pallister, I'm the chair of Pax Christi Scotland, and as a peace organisation, I think we're all worried about what is happening. So we have some excellent speakers with us tonight who will have the closest of connections with the Holy Land and the situation there. And of course, Pope Francis has been asking for peace as that fragility increases. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has sought peace, as has Pax Christi International, our parent organisation. So we have we have our speakers with us. What we don't have is our chaplain, who is Father Jim Clark. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to do that biz myself. I'm going to open with a prayer, and this is our Pax Christi Scotland prayer. So if we could just start with that. Lord God, fill our minds with your wisdom, fill our hearts with your love, and guide our words and actions that we might become the living presence of your peace. Bless Scotland and bless Israel and Palestine, that we may all witness to your transforming universal call to justice and inspire all that we do for and with your whole human family to protect and nurture all of your creation. Place within us the mind of servants, that we might build and nurture a world without violence to the building of your kingdom of love, justice, and peace. Amen. And now I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is the Rev Muriel Pearson. Muriel is a Church of Scotland mission partner, now acting as an associate minister at St Andrew's Church of Scotland, Jerusalem and Tiberias. She'll correct me if I've got all of that wrong. Glasgow born and bred, for nearly 17 years she was a Church of Scotland parish minister in Glasgow, and in blogs and letters from her new position, she's made it very clear how different life is today from when she ministered in Cranston, where sirens and daily death tolls were certainly not part of her day job. Muriel has described herself as a person of peace, interested in dialogue, and aware that polarizing conversation is sterile. I hope she will tell us more about her new job and her thoughts on seeking a non-violent future for the Holy Land. Muriel.
Thank you, Marion. Greetings from Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to take part in this panel and discussion. Here's a bit of background to my role here. It's an accident of history or divine will that the Church of Scotland has a church built as a war memorial and a guest house in Jerusalem, a hotel and a congregation in Tiberias, and a school, Tabitha School, in Jaffa. In terms of church presence and influence, we are small here, but we are here. Over time, we've tried to build on the legacy and the challenge left to us in pursuit of peace with justice. There are two mission partners, myself based in Tiberias and Reverend Dr. Stuart Gillen based in Jerusalem, living in Bet Jala. And there's a staff of Christians, Jews and Muslims working together in our school and in our hotels that is quite rare across the Holy Land. In the school, the diverse student body tell us again and again how much they value the diversity of their peer group. And while they receive an excellent English medium education in a Christian school, they often go on to key roles because of their language skills and their intelligent and open approach to difference. Most of the staff in the hotel in Jerusalem live in the West Bank and have the same issues of permits and closed checkpoints as other Palestinians working in Israel. But our staff retention rate is high, and staff speak of how much they value their colleagues as family. The same is true in Tiberias, where a much larger staff, almost 100, serve the guests in the 4-star hotel. About half the guests in Tiberias are Israeli, and the rest a mix of holidaymakers, pilgrims, and tourists. My role is to lead the small English-speaking congregation here, welcome pilgrims, support staff, act as chaplain in the hotel and the school, work with partner organizations, and strive to communicate to folk back home something of the complexity and the simplicity of life in the Holy Land. I want to introduce you to 3 of the Church of Scotland's partner organisations, but before I do that, I want to make it clear that here in Tiberias, it's possible to be very comfortable and only be exposed to the injustice and violence through news gathering, if that's what I want to do. Although Jenin is closer to Tiberias than Glasgow is to Edinburgh, I've never been there. And it's important to make sure I do go and meet people who are faced with the daily injustice of the prolonged occupation, the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements, increasing settler violence, unemployment and underemployment, a weak Palestinian Authority, and in Gaza, the blockade. But the legacy of the way the State of Israel came into being and the continued injustice faced by Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza and the Arab population that make up 20% of the population of what's sometimes called 48 Israel means that tension and fear are never very far from the surface here in Tiberias either. Most Israelis don't hate Palestinians the way some right-wing settlers and their allies do, but they suspect all Palestinians of being potential terrorists and tell themselves that their sons and daughters have to serve in the military and that the psychological damage they face is the price Israelis must pay to have a homeland. They don't see the separation barrier or the checkpoints or life beyond them, and they prefer to keep it that way. But Israelis are paying a high price, emotionally, financially, and spiritually, to hold on to the normal. And because of the current right-wing government and some of its extremist statements and actions, it's hard to keep things normal. Many hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been protesting weekly against the proposed changes to the judiciary that the Netanyahu government has brought in. They've been protesting weekly since the beginning of the year. And some of them are beginning to see that the inherent and inbuilt injustice faced by Palestinians is perhaps the biggest threat to democracy. And it's inextricably linked to the legislation they are protesting about. Perhaps there's an awakening, but it's not yet widespread. One organisation which is actively seeking to wake people up through the current pro-democracy movement is Waq Ma'an, who work to support Palestinian workers, particularly in non-unionised settings where permits are exploited and Palestinian workers underpaid and mistreated. They have joined the organising committee behind the weekly protests, and they're making the links between changes to the High Court and justice system and workers' rights. all workers' rights. Mahan say our staff is made up of both Jewish and Arab members, allowing us to assist the neediest of Israel's population, regardless of language or ethnicity. Mahan seeks to advance the status of workers of every ethnicity and gender, and to enhance their opportunities, thus creating a basis for equality throughout society. Another organization that we're partnering with is anxious to make connections between the pro-democracy movement and the rights of women. It's Women Lawyers for Social Justice, or Itach Ma'akai. They're highlighting proposed changes to the rabbinic courts that are given equal status to the secular justice system under the proposed legislative changes. The rabbinic courts have no female judges, sometimes don't allow women to be witnesses, and very often decide against women, even in domestic abuse cases, making it difficult for women to divorce their husbands. Itach Ma'akai has a number of current campaigns, including documenting and telling the stories of women of Abdelfattah in southern Hebron, helping Arab Israelis access childcare, and promoting a little heard of UN resolution 1325, which addresses the impact of war on women and the importance of women's full and equal participation in conflict resolution, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and post-conflict reconstruction. Like Mahan, this feminist organization also employs Jews and Arabs, and their call is for women to prepare to play their part in conflict resolution, recognizing that women often suffer most in conflict situations. The third organization I want to briefly introduce you to is Parents Circle Family Forum, which brings together bereaved Palestinian families with bereaved Israeli families, as well as helping one another with their shared grief. A stated aim of PCFF is to prepare for a time beyond the current occupation and the violence which comes of that, a time when Palestinians and Israelis will need to work together to build a different future. This year, I attended the annual memorial service held by PCFF and Combatants for Peace on the eve of Memorial Day, when Israeli dead are remembered. 15,000 people attended. 150 Palestinians were there and only granted permits at the last minute after a Supreme Court intervention. I was shown the way to the site of the ceremony by an Israeli woman who told me that she was demonstrating every week for democracy, but that she would never attend an event like the Joint Memorial Day because she was born in the year of the Yom Kippur War. She was a child of the storm, as she put it. There were a few extremist Zionist hecklers screaming outside the event that those attending were traitors. And on the Palestinian side, criticism is often made of those preparing to seek relationships with Israelis as a normalization of the current situation. Abdelfattah may say more about this. One take home from my input this evening, I hope, is that there are many small initiatives bringing people together to seek a non-violent future. These organizations need support and finance from outside Israel-Palestine. The latest attempts to limit such financial backing by imposing a 60% taxation on donations has been shelved, at least temporarily, by the Israeli government. The biggest lever for change at the moment is the pro-democracy movement in Israel. How can they be encouraged and supported to see the big picture? It's a tense time here. The violence, particularly in the north of the West Bank, and the racist and hateful language being used by the government and its supporters is getting worse. On Tuesday, following a raid in Jenin, where 100 people were injured, 5 Palestinians were killed and 8 Israelis were injured, and then a retaliatory attack on Israeli civilians at a petrol station. The American ambassador was criticized by right-wing members of the government for seeming to draw an equivalence between Israeli and Palestinian lives. Unless the equivalence is recognized, a non-violent future seems a distant dream. Peter Miller, in his book of reflections entitled Our Hearts Still Sing, tells the following Hasidic story. How can we determine the hour when the night ends and the day begins? Asked the teacher. When from a distance you can distinguish between a dog and a sheep, suggested one of the students. No, was the answer. Is it when one can distinguish between a fig tree and a grapevine? Asked a second student. No. Please tell us the answer then. It is, said the wise teacher, when you can look in the face of a human being and you have enough light to recognize in her or him your brother or your sister. Up till then, it is night and darkness is still with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Muriel, for your insights. You mentioned an awakening, which perhaps offers a glimmer of hope for a non-violent future. And the way that you ended there equally gives us a little hope. But the idea of the marginalization of women adds to our concerns, as does that objection to the equivalence of Palestinian and Israeli lives. It's there's a long way to go, I would suggest, but thank you, and please put your comments and your questions for Muriel into the chat, and Grace will lead that at the end. I'm now going to turn to Paul Gibson, who has recently returned from a 3-month placement on the ecumenical accompaniment program in Palestine and Israel in the South Hebron Hills. Paul returned to his life on a croft on the Isle of Mull, and he splits his time between the island and Edinburgh, working as a guide around Scotland. He's interested in bringing different groups to Mull to learn from and contribute to island life. But right now we want to hear about his experiences elsewhere and his own thoughts on seeking a non-violent future for the Holy Land. Paul, thank you for being with us this evening. I think we've got a spotlight on you there.
Feel the dazzle of it, Marianne. Good evening, everybody. Nice to be able to join you. So what I'm going to do first of all is attempt to share a screen to give you maybe possibly a presentation. We'll see how that goes. First time for everything. Imagine something's come up. You're not going to get the full screen, I don't think, because that's stretching my abilities. But this is me just back from 3 months in the Holy Lands. I was on the EAPPI program, which for those of you who don't know, it stands for Ecumenical accompaniment program in Palestine and Israel. So the kind of gist of it is that we were sent out, we were called out 20 years ago when the second Intifada took place, and there was no international presence to monitor what was going on. And so the World Council of Churches sent for us, or called for an international group, and it's very international program that takes place. And our main remit is essentially to go there and be able to witness firsthand what is going on, what are the maybe egregious situations taking place on a day-by-day basis. Often, the hope is as well that our presence as international people is something that's going to offer some semblance of deterrence for maybe some authority figures or even settlers to behave in a way that they might do otherwise. And perhaps most tangibly, certainly for us going out and in terms of making a connection with other people, we're there to provide an element of solidarity on the ground. And those who are acting. Oops, someone else's microphone is on, I think.
Could we make sure that everybody's mic is off, please? Thank you.
And the ultimate purpose is to do our part in, especially with returning home and advocating to try and call and clamour for an end to the military occupation, because that seems to be the largest obstacle to seeking some sort of justice and some sort of parity and some sort of dignity for those across the entire region. When I was sent out to the South Hebron Hills, which had almost flown beneath my radar somewhat before I arrived, but I felt very fortunate and very privileged to get the chance to spend some time out there. The South Hebron Hills is, funnily enough, just south of Hebron. It's right by the southernmost point of the West Bank, so it does border with Israel. It's a smattering of perhaps sort of 30 villages or so, and there's a population of around about 4,000 scattered through. In the 1980s was when the Israeli authorities designated it a firing zone, and this basically has given them almost free rein over that time to determine how people live, whether that be with the permission to build houses or more often not, as well as playing a part in controlling how it is that water supplies, energy supplies will find their way through. Those who live there generally are farmers or shepherds. That's the major source of livelihood, and that is the majority of people that we were going to go and meet, and the families that were a part of that. So with the short amount of time that I've got to try and talk about this, I wanted to take a little bit of that segment to go into at least one story. And every time that you head out as an EA, you will be finding almost your own rhythm with it. So we were a group of 5 who headed out to the South Hebron Hills. I believe one of them, Debbie, is sitting in today, so she can cross-check anything I say. But when we arrived to meet with our driver, worker and friend, Abid, who had a bit of a grasp of the area. But we began to start finding out some of the villages that we should go and visit or that we may go and visit. And Saleh, who lived in a small area of Wadadi, was somebody that we got to know quite well over the months. We began to spend our Saturdays joining him and his family, as this was a day when he would be often attempting to shepherd. But the issue that they had was that they live extremely remotely. We would get dropped off by car, and then we would have maybe a 40, sometimes a longer walk with Debbie, stroll along to get to where they live. From there, they're perched atop a hill, and the only thing you can see for miles is the Israeli border, but also an outpost, which even under Israeli law is termed or deemed illegal. Those who lived on the outpost, particularly on Saturdays, as that was Shabbat, was when they would spend their free time going and causing a lot of problems with Saleh, either trying to stop him from shepherding or trying to harass the family. At the house was his wife and 3 young children, very young, all under about 3 years old. We would go out, and often we'd go out, we're not meant to split up as a group, so either 2 of us would head out with Saleh for the day. If there was more of us, it was much better because it meant that some of us could head out with Sally to shepherd and some of us could stay at the house. And this gave a huge amount of reassurance, for one thing, for Sally to be able to head out and do his job and know that at least some people are at the house. And it was sometimes a balance of not trying to antagonize those who lived in the outposts by showing us as international people that were at the house, but also not being entirely invisible, so that if they did arrive, there would be some sort of outside eyes that would be watching them. So occasionally we witnessed people coming down from the outpost in 4x4s, trying to cause a lot of hassle, and we heard a lot worse reports in the times that we weren't there. A good example would have been when we did not go one Saturday because plans changed, and that was where a lot of harassment took place, and a lot of damage to Sally's property was underway. As well as this, though, idea that we're going to bear witness to people's struggles, also part of the sheer privilege of going out to be on the programme is that we get to just accompany people in the day-to-day lives. And the day-to-day lives is not all about suffering and struggle. There's huge amounts of lessons that we can take as people from outside of the region into how to live in terms of the basic balance of life, in terms of a skill set, in terms of cultural values. The fact that we would go out with Sally and he would be with his flock of 100 sheep and 50 goats, and using this as a means of providing a livelihood, that him and his wife would use the sheep, use the milk for cheese and for yogurts and for selling this. It also, I think, gave, particularly coming from a rural part of Scotland, a sense in some ways of what we've lost, which is that connection to the land and the importance that that does provide for us. So I think in terms of how trying to look at this and the sort of general question of how we approach trying to create non-violence in such a region, we've been lucky to have sort of Muriel will give some of the perspective from living within Israel, and Abdelfattah will give some stirring points of life within Palestine. As internationals, I think, we have to come at it. Part of the program is to be impartial, but to speak out about injustice. But I think it is also very important to be coming in and trying to see what we can also learn, so we don't create this hierarchy of struggle or suffering. And so with that, Sally was able to give us some fairly salient points over the time. So he would tell us that there's basically nothing better than this, and we were very fortunate to join on some occasions where you just seen this in motion. One time we heard the yelp of a goat, which we presumed had stuck its paw into a thorn or something, and suddenly a newborn appears, and without even breaking stride, Sally was over and just tending to it and playing the role of midwife, knowing exactly what to do, caring for this young kid. And just again, that sort of connection with everything going on around was something I took a lot of inspiration from. In the face of all of that, also looking at this from the outside, it seemed to be not so much, well, it's obviously very much an issue to do with Israel and Palestine and how they interact with one another. I see it often less as an issue to do with Jewish people against Palestinians or Muslims and Christians, and often it's a battle over resources, and that was something that was extremely glaring within the South Hebron Hills. We're able to get some reference points to it, and given that the South Hebron Hills is almost entirely under Area C, it's under the remit of the Israeli military. They do get access to water, but it's hugely contained compared to other people. So villages in the South Hebron Hills will get on average about 28 litres per day. That's about a third of what the World Health Organization says that you need to live on. Israeli settlers, on the other hand, take about 7.5 times that, 211 litres per day. And these settlements, the problem is that they're coming into areas and taking up all of the resources. And there's just a huge imbalance there. And the more they take resources away from people, the more desperate people are going to find the situation. And so it becomes less of an issue around identity and more of an issue around survival. And the more that goes on, the greater the harm it's going to cause to everybody. It's just the idea that some of the landscape we had was just incredible to be in, and it did remind me a lot of the history in some ways of Scotland, in terms of looking at people living in villages of perhaps 20 to 100 people scattered across hillsides. It meant that when I returned home, it was just really quite potent to drive through a lot of these quite barren hillsides in Scotland and almost just try and look at them and view them with the shepherds and the farmers of the South Hebron Hills, because that livelihood seems so similar. Even actually people's faces were unbelievably similar. I've never seen so many Scottish looking people anywhere in the world. So that was really quite something to take in, just again to learn almost about the sense of loss that I could feel in a cultural sense, and felt that that created some sort of element of connection, which hopefully gives some of the inspiration to try and to push for this, to bring about something just and something lasting and something that does have integrity to it. And that's where we've kind of almost got to position our own sense of empathy with what we've gone through, and that sense of struggle and that sense of cultural trauma that runs through places like the Highlands. You can understand perhaps better how it's going on in these places with some sense of personal connection or understanding. So that's where I think we have to kind of maybe come at an international perspective and see how we can make it work. And to close, just a sense of a message from Haj Jabreen, who I could have spoken for 10 minutes about one lunch I've had with him, for example. He was very captivating, but he'll have to close us for now, which was a very simple request. He's a man whose family had been on those lands since before 48. He lost a brother in the 67 war through an accidental bombing. He's gone through a lot of struggle in his life, and he knows how to push back when he faces violence. But he's also a very peaceful person who taught us a lot. And he basically said that he wishes for peace for all, and we must try to live in a world where we no longer occupy one another. And so he was someone inspirational to try and close us with. And I'll pass you back to Marion. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. The threatening behaviour that you describe and the continued harassment are perhaps what those of us without that personal experience imagine when we think of Palestine. And you've given us kind of two sides of the story, but the water and power disparities are very concerning, as is the continued violence that is there. Your work is very valuable, and I'm sure if anyone is inspired to join the programme, could you put a link in the chat that would help people to put themselves forward for that particular work? And I've known other people like yourselves, and the work you do is just incredible. So thank you. And don't forget to put your questions for him and for all our speakers into the chat as well. And I now want to turn to our final speaker, Dr. Abdelfattah Abusrour, who will talk, I hope, about the current deteriorating Palestinian situation and how his work fits into that. Some of you will remember that he spoke on a previous Pax Christi Scotland event some time back, and my gut feeling is that since then life in Palestine has become more difficult than it was even then. We as an organisation are calling the situation imposed by the Israeli government apartheid, and I wonder if he and our other speakers would use that label, which is shared by Pax Christi International. Abdelfattah grew up in a refugee camp. He has a PhD in biological and medical engineering from France, but life took a bit of a different turn when he returned to Palestine, where he co-founded the Al-Awad Cultural and Theatre Centre for Children in a refugee camp in Bethlehem in 1988. And he can correct me on all of my pronunciation for everything there. He was president of the Palestinian Theatre League from 2009 to 2013. He's been a member of the Advisory National Team for Strategic Planning for the Ministry of Culture since 2011. And he was secretary of the Preparatory Committee for Bethlehem Arab Culture Capital for 2020. He works as general director of Al Rawad Cultural and Arts Centre and teaches part-time at Bethlehem University. As if he had time for anything else, he does. He writes plays and books, and he's empowering Palestinian children with a new form of non-violent resistance by providing alternative activities for creative expression and positive change, as well as therapeutic outlets for anger. He says he's created this community centre to safeguard the right of children to have a childhood, creating and promoting the concept of beautiful resistance. To me, that does sound like seeking a non-violent future for the Holy Land. So I'm going to pass over to him and see what he can tell us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Muriel and Paul, for your interventions. As Marianne said, I was born in Aida refugee camp, which is one of 59 refugee camps established after this tragedy 75 years ago that we call Nakba. My parents were among the 70% of Palestinian refugees who were uprooted from their villages, Beit Natif and Zakaria, to among 534 villages which were occupied and destroyed by Zionist groups at that time. Many people, when they come to Palestine, say, you know, it's very complicated. You should forget, you should forgive and move on. Now, I don't know how complicated it is. I guess Scottish people do understand us a lot. Irish people do understand us a lot. Jews do understand us a lot. But yet there is an injustice that is going on since beyond 100 years. To start with the French and the British promises to the Zionist movements in 1917. And here we are. So how can you forget something that is happening until today? The tragedy did not end in 1948 or 1967 or the supposed to be peace process in Oslo in 1993, which would have ended in 1998 with two states living in love and harmony. It is ongoing. And the way it is ongoing to more extremist governments, where parliament members and ministers in this Israeli government who clearly say, kill Palestinians, give carte blanche for soldiers to shoot, to kill immediately. We see targeted assassinations and killing people in the streets without any judgment, without any court, without any of this, the only democracy in the Middle East. We hear ministers to erase villages and towns, and as Paul said, continue this ongoing ethnic cleansing until today. So either the Israelis are so intelligent or so idiot and stupid that they want to remind us every single moment in our life that we are still under occupation, and you will not even be given the luxury of forgetfulness. So it's ongoing, unfortunately. And why it is ongoing? Because there is an international hypocrisy and complicity with this ongoing injustice that did not stop since more than 100 years, even before the invention of what is called Israel today. Forgive. We are generous people, I reclaim. We are hospitable. We welcome oppressed people. And for those who passed by Jerusalem, they can see that the Palestinian culture is a culture of inclusion and not exclusion. It's a culture of openness and hosting oppressed people, including Jews at a certain time, including Armenians, Africans, and so on. You walk in the old city in Jerusalem, you see Armenian quarter, Jewish quarter, Muslim quarter, Christian quarter, Afghani corner, Indian corner, and so many other variety that give you that space where people are welcomed regardless of their color or religion or ethnicity. But it is a culture also of justice and equality, not a culture of slavery and oppression on continuous level that can thrive. People talk about peace. I become very allergic to this word because it comes with peace that is a business nowadays, and that makes peace cut into pieces that cannot connect in any way to build any real peace. Is the problem is to put Israelis and Palestinians together, Jews and Muslims and the Christian together? In every country in the world, they have lived together and will continue to live together. But the only way in any country in the world, whether it's under occupation or a free country, is to put people on equal grounds, is to put people under a just system. Wherever there is injustice, there cannot be peace. And people who are seeking to make peace while this injustice is going on are dreaming or very naive, in fact. The problem is not between Moshe and Muhammad and George. The problem is with this whole system that concretizes the apartheid, the segregation, and not only between Muslim and Christian and Jews, even between Jews themselves. You look at how Black Jews are treated in Israel. You look at how Arab Jews are treated in Israel. And you can see that this country that promotes that this is a country for Jews only, it is for a specific type of Jews. And even if those white European Jews, if they are critical to the system, then they are threatened, then they are blackmailed, then they are used as traitors or qualified as self-hating Jews or anti-Semitic Jews or whatever. You have been living, Muriel, in Palestine, historical Palestine, or Palestine 48, as we call it, and probably you have witnessed this kind of thing. And maybe in your passage, Paul, you have also know about those historians who left, or those journalists like Ellen Pape, who wrote Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, who lives in the UK today, and or Shlomo Sand, or Gideon Levy, who is continuously threatened in his life because he dares to write the facts, not invent any facts, and so on. So with all the pain, sympathy, empathy to Jews and their suffering, I guess everybody knows we were not the cause of their suffering. We are not here to pay for the crimes of the Nazis or Europe or whoever. Our conflict is not religious, even though it is promoted as religious. The Zionist movement, which was declared as a racist movement by the UN in 1975 until 1991, where it was removed out of the list of racist movement after pressure from the Israelis to go to the negotiations of Madrid in 1991. You can Google that. It was a racist movement and continue to be a racist movement. And this is the mentality that directs all what is happening in this part of the world. But now it's more extremist because there is no accountability on any level by the UK or by the Americans or by the Europeans, or even by the Arab countries, for what Israel is committing on a daily basis. The report of Amnesty International declaring Israel as a racist movement, as an apartheid system, sorry, was attacked hugely as anti-Semitic, anti-this, anti-that, and equalizing between Israeli, Jew, Israelite, Semite, Zionist, 5 terminologies that are not equal on any level, but yet they are used continuously as if they are. We have the oldest Israelite community in Palestine, in Nablus, the Samaritan community, who present themselves as Israelites, but not as Jews, because Judaism was not born yet in the time of Israel or Jacob, may peace be upon him, or his descendants until probably Moses or the kingdom of David and Solomon, which lasted for 105 years. And then Jesus was born in Palestine, and then Our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam ascended to the skies from Jerusalem. So who can say this is only for Jews, or this is only for Muslims, or this is only for Christians? This is a racist movement that cannot, a racist notion that cannot fit with the culture and identity of Palestine and Palestinians and their identity as people of multiplicity and diversity. I was born in a refugee camp, and my parents' villages are about a 20-25 minutes ride in the car from the refugee camp of Aida in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, as you may know, is about 9 kilometers to the south of Al-Quds, Jerusalem. It is surrounded by this illegal wall of expansion and annexation, where the refugee camp I lived in from the east and north, 3 meters deep in the ground, 8 meters above the ground, 6 towers of snipers, cameras of surveillance, was declared the zone the most exposed to tear gas in the world by a study in 2017 by Berkeley University. This continues until today, these incursions. They recently installed automatic cannon for tear gas canisters to shoot tear gas canisters directly with a press of a button to the population in Aida camp. And so we are here about 6,200 people originating from 43 different villages among the 534. 2/3 of this population are under 24 years old on a space of 0.07 square kilometers with more than 70% of unemployment rate and continuously harassed with our living, despite the fact that they built this illegal wall of expansion and annexation. And it's not just a security barrier, as they say, it's concrete and so on. And it surrounds the camp from the east and north. And this continues and say that it's a security war. Okay, so why do you come in Aida camp? Why do you harass these children and young people and so on? The work I am trying to do is give possibilities and not dictate a code of behavior. It's about using performing and visual arts. Theater is one of the most amazing, powerful, civilized, truthful, non-politically correct ways to express yourself. Shout as loud as you want. And hopefully this would be a way to build peace within yourself, to be peace builder in your community and beyond. Work with kindergartens, with schools, with parents, focusing on mothers and women, because I believe that women are the real change makers in the world. Connecting with the music, dance, singing, photography, video, making films, and establishing now with hope to find other partners, music school and cinema school and production house for young cinema makers, giving possibilities for these young people, these families, these children think living for their country and not just die for their country or whatever cause they are defending. If the Israelis want us to be just numbers on list of martyrs or handicapped for the rest of our lives or perish in Israeli prison, we want to celebrate life and give possibilities for our young people to grow up and change the world and create miracles and be proud of their achievement and the heritage we leave for them. We are fed up of walking in the funerals of our children. So when a child who is 8 or 10 years old look in your face and say, I want to die, why do you want to die? Because nobody cares. Because when the Israeli soldiers come in the middle of the night and put my house upside down and humiliate my father or my mother in front of me, what use for life? If a child who is 8 years old tell you that, then it's the shame for humanity all. Because a child who loses hope at that age, that means that all the systems have failed. All these promises of human rights and international law, which give the right, full right for any oppressed people to resist by all means that includes armed struggle. That armed struggle is not a terrorist act, it is a legitimate right. And when you see how the whole world responded to Ukraine resistance against Russia, you can see how great the support is with weapons and mercenaries and funding and machines and whatever. Why is it so much for Palestinians to resist the occupation? Even though 99% of Palestinians never carried a gun in their life. And they resisted through a lot of non-armed ways. And this is most of the time. In fact, the only resistance that started fully as armed struggle movement was in 1965. So Palestinians wait long time. So let me just differentiate between violence and non-violence, and between armed struggle, which is legitimate, and non-armed struggle, which is the practice that most Palestinians have done. I cannot recognize a legitimate right as violence. Violence is just aggression and attacks and killing against innocent people. And I can identify with whatever that means, that terrorism is attacking innocent people. And that applies on everybody, and not an umbrella to say Israelis have the right to defend themselves, but Palestinians do not have that right. Everybody has the right to defend themselves. And when these settlers go and burn houses and attack villagers and poison animals and water wells and so on, why they are not accountable for their crimes and their terrorism? And let's look who promoted and creating terrorism in this part of the world. Wasn't it the terrorist Zionist groups in the 30s and 40s? The Stern, the Haganah, the Irgun, and so on. Wasn't they labeled as terrorists? All the prime minister of Israel, one after the other, in the early times, Shamir, Begin, and even Golda Meir. Wasn't she having the Palestinian passport? And when she created Israel, they said there is no such thing as Palestinian people. So there is a lot of things, unfortunately, that are happening. And talking about peace building groups, which Muriel referred to as, and I refer to as normalization, because Israelis, and there are some amazing Israelis, and their role clearly is not next to me. Their role is within their own community to help bring justice to all Jews in the Israeli side. And that includes the 20% of Palestinians of 1948 Palestine, because they are Israeli citizens and they don't have the equal rights. These amazing Israelis should work to remove the injustice that is happening until today. These illegal colonies that are considered illegal even with the UK government, that they should be removed. That this illegal wall of expansion and annexation that is considered illegal to be removed. But to say that Palestinians and Israelis can meet and hug and kiss and eat and weep on the shoulders of each other, okay, that's great. But at the end of the day, everybody goes back to his corner of the wall and nothing changes. We are not interested in public relations. We are not interested to make a show for people who are having good intentions, that we put Israelis and Palestinians together, so everything is fine. We created peace. But I don't see any peace that happened until today with all the millions that have been spent on this business of peace buildings. Now, I love people. I love those who have good intentions, but good intentions do not change the world. We need good actions to accompany. And I'll finish by this. People who ask us to forgive, we will be happy to forgive. But who apologized or asked for our forgiveness? The French, whose Minister of Foreign Affairs, Monsieur Jules Cambon, on the 4th of June, 1917, followed by Lord Balfour, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the British government, in the 2nd of November, 1917, made promises to the Zionist movements, or the UN, who partitioned our country without asking for our opinion, or the Israeli, or those who continue to support Israel. We would be happy to forgive, but at least please ask for forgiveness and present your excuses to a price that we paid as Palestinians in a crime that we have nothing to do with. When they say God promised them this land, I don't think God is a real estate agent. People can reclaim their right. Palestinian Jews are Palestinians, Muslim Palestinians are Palestinians, Christian Palestinians are Palestinians, but British Jews are British, Christian British are British, Jewish people, British are British, and so on. So this is not a country that is open permitted for everybody like any other country. I hope that the world one day will be open, that people can just circulate freely without visas, without all these harassments that we face. But at the end of the day, if we are put on equal grounds, peace can come. But no peace can come with oppression, injustice, and facts on the ground that are created by an oppression without any accountability and waiting for Israelis to wake up. They have no reason to wake up because it's ongoing. The time that we steal is to give possibilities for our children, hopefully, to steal them from the streets and have them in the center or facilities that they can make films, they can dance, they can study, they can grow up and change the world and hopefully stay alive and build their peace within, to be peace builders in their community to start with and in the world. And the same applies for those amazing Israelis need to build their peace within their side of the world. And hopefully when we are in equal grounds, we can create the best peace in the world, but not while oppression is going on, because this is too much to ask from people who just want to live and not just to die. Thank you.
Sorry, like everyone, I think I'm gathering breath there. Thank you so much, Abdelfattah. As always, the colonial past, the decisions made by British governments of the past come back to haunt us. And the complications created today by the current Israeli government are indeed the result of hypocrisy. I understand the reluctance to label the situation as apartheid because of the anti-Semitic accusations that come with that. I understand your allergy to the word peace without equality and justice. So we pray for peace, for equality and justice for all our brothers and sisters. And we want you to tell us how to get our government to act with honor. And so I'm going to turn now to the Q&A session. I'm going to hand over to Grace Buckley, who is a member of the Pax Christi Scotland Executive Committee. And I see that you've been posting questions and comments and so on for all our speakers in the chat. I'm going to attempt to put them all on the spotlight in a second. And I'd like to cheat a bit and ask the first question of all our speakers, is there hope for the future?
I would like Abdelfattah to go first with that question.
Well, yes, of course. A lot of people say it's hopeless. I say we don't have this luxury of despair. This is not a heritage that we can leave to our children and the generations to come, at least despite the whole hopelessness around us. We owe them a hopeful present and a future. And even in the darkest moments, we try to inflame hope and promote life and commitment to our values and the human rights as human beings. You know, when we toured with our shows, we toured in Sweden, Denmark, France, Belgium, Austria, United States, United Kingdom, with our theater and dance groups. And we had workshops with different communities, but one particular was in Louisville, Kentucky, with Afro-American kids. And after a week of workshops, we sat for evaluation with our kids and asked them what they think. And they said they are poorer than us. So imagine Palestinian children living in a refugee camp under occupation, going to the biggest, richest country in the world and say these Afro-Americans are poorer than us. This is a country that does not have external occupation. I mean, they were occupiers already compared to the indigenous Americans and so on. But with the African population with American nationality, they felt that there is an injustice that is happening today. And that's a major thing, that when we identify even as victims with other victims as equals, and that you don't need foreign occupation to come and say we are living an injustice and we are the monopoly of suffering. There is a lot of suffering in this world, a lot of victims in this world, and we cannot bring peace with saying we are the only victims and all other victims don't count. So yes, we don't have this luxury of despair, and that's why if people are waiting for miracles to happen, miracles will not happen alone. We need to provoke them to happen, because every single one of us is important. Every single one of us is a change maker, and nothing will change if we just say the government will do it or the king will do it. Even God will not help those who do not help themselves. So we owe our children and the generations to come a better future. And my whole life, I have been haunted with this question. If one day one of my children or your children or whoever children come and look us in the face and say, what did you do to make a change? What heritage are you leaving us? I hope none of us will fade in shame and say, I thought the president will do it, or this will do it, or that will do it. But we can say that we did something. Maybe it takes time because we don't have a magical wand to make peace and just be. It will take time. It needs patience. It needs commitment. It needs the effort, collective effort of everybody, that everybody is important in this building of this peace. If there is holes in this wall of peace, of course it will collapse. And that's why, of course, there is hope. People can live together, and the only way people can live together is on equal basis. You have been living in the UK and part of the UK as a Scottish, Irish, and so on. Why still some people reclaim independence? Even though you are kind of equal, you have your currency in the UK and so on. So there is a problem sometimes that refers to your identity, your folklore, your heritage, your mindsets, your language, and so on, even in a free system that you live in. Because this is also your personal thing as well, to identify yourself on who you are and what you are. Now, those who merge with the system, that's great. Those who cannot merge with the system, they have the right to reclaim their entity and their identity and to be recognized as integer of their humanity. Thank you.
Do either of the other two want to join in? Add anything to it? Paul?
Yeah, but I think Abdelfattah said it very well. It was something we discussed quite often, us and some of the people in the area and other people on the program. And we certainly had a sense that the way we act, the way we behave is not so much in the name of hope, almost, especially if we're maybe ourselves are that much more detached from it, then we operate to try and improve and change the situation almost in the absence of hope. And the hope is that we may one day move to a place where there is hope. And so there, as Abdelfattah said, it's almost an idea. If there's a mountain or a wall in front of us, then just keep chipping away, not because you think you're going to be able to chip and make the holes all the way through, but because if everybody starts to do that, and they do that because that's the aim of the purpose, then one day that cascade might actually break through.
You, anything to add?
I think I've become a lot more cautious about using words like hope, using phrases like non-violent peacemaking, because it's difficult to see how that can be anything other than wishful thinking without the kind of involvement and action that Abdelfattah is talking about. So I'm cautious. I'm cautious about proclaiming hope. And in many ways, I think the current Israeli government is making it easier to see the injustices and the inequalities and the inhumanity. But the will in the UK and the US and elsewhere to pay attention. As Abdelfattah said, there's been a recognition of Ukrainians' right to defend their land, but for whatever reason, and I think a very strong Israeli Zionist lobby is part of the answer, that people are reluctant to really hold the government to account. And it's difficult for someone who lives and works in Israel and who banks with an Israeli bank and eats Israeli food. It's difficult it's difficult not to be complicit. So that even though I'm here to try and provide support and solidarity and to tell the stories in Scotland and to try and make the very polarized and black and white narrative more nuanced, it's not easy.
Right, just looking at the time, let's lighten a little bit by taking some of the easy questions. Elizabeth Burrows was asking the names of the two other groups that you mentioned, Muriel. One was Parent Circle, she recognised that one. She says, do they have websites for the other two? So if you could maybe...
Yes, they do. I'm not clever enough to put the website in the chat, but what I can do is put the names of the organisations in the chat and you'll be able to find it by Googling.
Great.
So great. One of them was a trade union workers' rights movement, and the other was a feminist lawyers association that was looking to support people facing the injustice that is part of the everyday life of the very imbalanced situation that Abdelfattah was talking about, where there is no level playing field.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that.
Muriel, can I just say, Grace, Muriel, if you want to email me the details of that, I can send it out to everybody who was registered for the event this evening.
Okay.
If that's easier for you.
Great. Thank you, Marion. There was also a question from Anne-Marie Clements about a copy of the poem. I presume Anne-Marie was meaning your story, which I think was one of...
it was from Peter Miller's book.
Peter Miller's book, yeah.
Yeah, Our Hearts Still Sing, and it's a Hasidic story that he quotes there.
Right, thank you. There was a small group of questions that were Paul, but obviously the other two of you can join in if you want to. Kwechi was asking, Paul, did you face any challenges during your stay there? And also you mentioned farming, and he was interested in what kind of crops they produce and what kinds of tools or machinery.
In terms of farming, barley and wheat was very common. There was some, it's basic machinery, well-maintained machinery for the most part. In terms of crops, the barley and wheat was mostly for feed for the animals. Part of the challenge was that it's almost like a race to the bottom, because sometimes settlers would come in and part of the maneuvering was to take their flock onto the lands that were the Palestinian lands, and so they would take the flock over and they would eat all of the barley. So rather than have no barley whatsoever, it became this sort of more of a desperate situation where shepherds would be then forced to take their sheep to eat the barley when it was even younger, rather than let it grow. And so it meant that there was often not as much of an abundance of growth. And this also meant that you were covering a lot more grounds to get a lot less food, which also means that your day is just far longer. So in terms of a day in, day out, that's a particular challenge. A few of the villages, we met people who had arbitrarily had vehicles confiscated. Often this was just cars, but the cars would be carrying various bits of feed and whatnot. part of the issue when they couldn't get when they can't grow the stuff themselves is they have to buy it, and the prices, partly because of Ukraine and Russia, the prices have rocketed. So they're having to spend a huge amount of what income they have on that. So it's a massive challenge. In terms of challenges I faced, yeah, someone else has asked a question about, did I have any interactions with the soldiers?
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, not a great situation, but I did find myself arrested near the end of the time. So that was one way to have an interaction. Very arbitrary. Lots of micro moments as to how that exactly happened, but essentially I was, yeah, requested by a shepherd to call the police, and so the police arrived, and then they arrested me. So that meant that I got a very interesting one-on-one interaction with the police officer, and it was very telling in lots of ways to have that element of authority, behaving like it's got authority, which it very much did. So he didn't take kindly to having somebody from the outside meddling as far as he saw it, or he was accusing me of causing trouble. What I was able to do, I was in a much more fortunate position than perhaps Palestinian would have been. So just was able to push back at the right moments, and I felt almost quite relaxed to not succumb to whatever pressure we were trying to put onto. So I could be a bit more lighthearted. So by the end of it, we were at least making jokes, and I managed to get on first name terms with him. So, but even within that, I could see some of the vulnerability, because he doesn't want people meddling, and we can look at all the power reasons for that. But there was also a lot of insecurity, and I think the insecurity is that often they feel that the world hates them, and so I was trying to assuage that somewhat. And he was saying things like, he's got his children to learn Arabic, and I did recognize that not only does his children and himself speak Arabic and Hebrew, but he was speaking English so that I could interact with them. So I know I had to concede that point. I'm in a land much closer to where he's from, but he's speaking a language to accommodate me, so I could find some grounding with that. And he repeatedly said, we're not bad people, And I said, I agree, I don't think you're bad people. I've met a lot of nice Israelis. At the same time, I thought to myself, it's a very funny way to show it, given that he's sort of thrown me into a car. But that all worked out fine. There was obviously a lot of background work from the program, which was adding a lot of stress to a lot of people, which wasn't great. But it was very illuminating in terms of trying to see somebody's perspective. And he's obviously, he's the front face of an egregious power. But he also, as an individual, had his own stories, and having that couple of hours to kind of cut through in that and see that from that perspective gave me a whole level of perspective, I think, for how to understand how people are operating on all the sides.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any interactions though with the settlers, or was that a stage too far?
I didn't really get the chance to interact with the settlers. No, we had one bizarre day where we were with, again, a couple of days before the arrest, which partly precipitated it, but a settler ran just as we came over the brow of a hill, ran towards about 3 flocks of sheep, made them all scatter. And before we even knew what was going on, the army had him under arrest, and he had another settler friend come to try and mediate. And so this very chaotic scene was happening for a while. So that was the closest interaction to a settler. And that was also a time where the soldiers on that instance did arrest him and kind of pushed him back.
Mm-hmm. Right. Next question, I think, is originally set for Paul, but I think all three, if you would want to be involved in it, I can get it down to it. And Marie's raising the point that we all thought when the current government was elected, it would be real turn for the worse. But would it be possible that this might improve situations because Israeli society starts to relate the democracy issues to the Palestinian issue? And I think, Muriel, you alluded to this. Any thoughts from Paul or Abdelfattah on that?
Happy to let Abdelfattah go in first.
Well, all the time we say it can't be worse, yet worse comes and comes stronger. And again, because Israel has no accountability, it's protected. And so they have no reason to stop going further and further. And every time there is somebody to protect. And do this media brainwashing continuously. You said, Marianne, that you don't use apartheid word because anti-Semitic and so on. And this is one of the media brainwashing that continues, unfortunately. Equating or equalizing between Jew and Semitic, Jew and Israelite, Jew and Israeli, Jew and Zionist. While these are 5 terminologies that are not equal on any level, because I am Semite. All Muslim, Christian, Jews in this part of the world are Semites. Africans are Hamites, Europeans are Japhethites. We are all descendants of Noah, the sons of Noah, Sam, Ham, and Japheth. And so not every Jew is Semite, and not every Semite is Jewish. So they always have this exclusivity. Abraham is Jewish property, Israel is Jewish property, Moses is Jewish property, and so on. While they are honored by Muslims and Christians and Jews. They are not a property. And the same with Semitism. You could be Muslim or a Christian or Jewish as Semite. And you could be a Jew who is not Semite. There has been conversion to Judaism as well in Europe and so on. That has nothing to do with this part of the world. We have the oldest Israelite community in the world, the Samaritan community, as I probably said. And they present themselves as Israelites, but not as Jews. So not all Israelites are Jewish, and not all Jews are Israelites with those converted in Europe and other places. Are all Jews Zionist? Of course not. Are all Zionists Jewish? Again, no. So there is, again, no synonym between Jew and Zionist and Jewish. Are all Jews Israeli? No. Are all Israeli Jews? No. So these are 5 terminologies that are not equal, but they are used to confuse the whole world, that if you dare to criticize Israel, then you push a button and you will be attacked in every angle. You protest against your British government, don't you? You go in demonstrations in the streets. Are you anti-British? Are you anti-Christian? Are you anti-European or white or whatever? You protest because you want to make things better, hopefully, because you seek justice, because you seek something to improve from your government who you elected, and not because you hate Britain or you hate the Christians or because you hate the white people or because you hate this and that. So the illusion that if anybody dares to criticize Israel, then they are continuously attacked as anti-Semitic, anti-this, anti-that. Even if they are Jewish, they are self-hating Jews or traitors or anti-Semitic Jews, as they say. There is a problem with this continuous aggression to stop people from criticizing anything. We are not saying things because of hatred. Some do, of course. And we want to see things better and so on. So that's why, unfortunately, peace cannot be built. Things cannot be better with the complicity and silence of everybody else. This problem, this tragedy happened not because of Jews or by Jews, essentially, but by foreign governments, colonizing system with the British and the French who made this happen, and they should take responsibility of ending it and find a solution for it and make Israel realize that they cannot continue with this oppression or apartheid or injustice and say we are fine with it. This is a responsibility that lays for those who created this problem and legitimized it with the UN resolutions. By the way, the UN resolution was that Israel respect also other UN resolutions, and more than 80 of these resolutions were never respected until today, and no problem again. So things can be better, but with the collective effort of everybody, not just wait for Israel mercy and great forgiveness to change things by itself.
Grace, I would like to mention briefly something that the British government is doing at the moment. It's colloquially called Gove's Law or anti-BDS legislation that had its first reading in the House of Commons. And Gove says that the purpose of this legislation is to defeat anti-Semitism, but it's actually about making life difficult for the Labour Party, because Keir Starmer is going to have to oppose this because it's against free speech, it's against United Nations, it's a horrible piece of legislation. And I think that people in the UK would be well, a good use of time and energy, if you've got any left, would be to write to your MP and to really make a fuss about this legislation. It's coming for its second reading at the beginning of July.
Yeah, I've already written to mine, who's Alison Theos, so you think you'll find most of the SNP are anti this legislation.
I know. It's no fun. It's no fun when they agree with you, is it?
The problem with I find myself saying JCB. Yep, is that the donors getting their money's worth? But yes, if people can do that, it certainly is it's a piece. When we have so many problems in our country, for our government to be spending precious time on this kind of legislation is horrific. Looking at the time we've got left, got one question which I think sort of comes from what we've been discussing, and it's a question which maybe Abdelfattah starts the answer on, but it's basically saying the absence of leadership in the Palestinian side. How can we seriously address the issues for the Palestinians while Mahmoud Abbas is a president? I might extend it to say also, how can we deal with it when you don't seem to be getting the support from the rest of the Arab world to sort this out? But how do we get negotiations going in the current situation for Palestinians? As though it's a hot potato.
So the problem is, if I am allowed to respond to this, is
Sure.
that we are people who are under occupation. And people are requesting us to be democratic and behave that if we have all the resources to control our life, our land, and so on. Paul mentioned Area C. Area C composes 62% of the West Bank. There is no city, no village that you can move in and out without absence of controls by the Israeli occupation soldiers. Bethlehem Governorate have 87% Area C and 5% only Area A. For those who do not know, Area A is supposed to be under full Palestinian Authority control, but it is permitted land also where Israelis can come and go and do whatever they want. Israeli soldiers, I mean, because according to Israeli law, Israeli people are not allowed to come in the Palestinian areas. Otherwise, they will be imprisoned, and there is big, how you call it, panels that say it's forbidden for Israeli citizens to go into Palestinian towns and so on. But the Palestinian Authority, it reminds me of the government of Vichy in France during the German Nazi occupation, if you can see the parallel. They are there to protect the Israelis, not the Palestinians. That's why a child who is 8 years old tells me I want to die because nobody cares. When the Israeli soldiers come, they have no protection. The Palestinian Authority also is discredited by this Israeli occupation when they come and invade Bethlehem, demolish homes and so on, and collective punishments. And the Palestinian Authority cannot do anything to stop the Israelis from coming into any Palestinian city, even to the heart of Bethlehem, even to the Church of the Nativity, and do whatever they want and leave without any accountability. So Mahmoud Abbas or no Mahmoud Abbas, it would be the same system, because you are, as a president, you cannot even leave the country or move from Bethlehem to Ramallah or Ramallah to Bethlehem without a permission from the Israeli government or military and so on. Any soldier at any checkpoint can stop the president and the prime minister and whoever and make them wait for hours without any problem. So there is no government. Now the leadership, there has been great leadership. But if you follow how many were targeted, assassinated by the Israeli Mossad or Shin Bet or whatever in Palestine and outside Palestine, or else imprisoned and so on. So there has been continuous getting rid of all possible great leadership that could lead Palestinians somewhere. And so we have only junk now, if I can say. Of course, there are those who are behind the scenes and not involved directly in political parties, whatever they are. And for me, I don't feel that I am represented by any political party, whoever they are. We have more than 14 political parties. I don't identify with any of them. That's why I work with children, I work with the population, because this is where we hope that great leaderships will come. Once the international community realizes that justice should be the basis for any peace and independence of Palestinians, or one state or two states or 30 states, whatever the solution is, if it is not based in justice and respect of human rights and values, it will not work. We work for that. We work for respect of human rights and values. We work for respect of the human dignity and building peace within individuals to be peace builders in their community and the world. Leadership, there is. And when people take, where is the Palestinian Gandhi? We have millions of Palestinian Gandhis. They are not given their chance, or they just moved out of the public arena because all what is there is corruption, dictation from the international community, from the Israelis. You should sign that you are a terrorist. If I have request of funding from the European Union or USAID or whatever, I should recognize that my legitimate resistance, armed struggle is terrorism. Who can sign that? Who can identify with that and say yes in that sense? So that is a problem in that level. I agree that Abbas is not the best president, but Abbas is also doing the best he can under these circumstances to respect international community will. He condemns even Palestinian armed struggle and so on. So what the world wants from him, blackmailing him continuously and so on, he has to move. We should have elections. Israelis do not allow elections in the eastern part of Jerusalem. This is an excuse or not an excuse. I don't believe that there is possibility of a great leadership under occupation within the present political situation, not only on Israel, but also in the Arab world and in the international community. Nobody until today dares to criticize Israel and make them accountable. So whatever leadership will come, they will be assassinated, as happened also with Abu Ammar or Yasser Arafat. He was assassinated one way or the other. And even though he tried to compromise a lot with the Israelis and so on, but there is time when people are fed up of this hypocrisy. Hopefully, people can be able to bring better people to the government. But look at me, or a lot of people like me who will not be involved in the government, because you have to be corrupt to be involved now in the government. You have to just give up your identity, your right to struggle and so on. Even with non-armed struggle that we do, you have to sign that you are against armed struggle, which is again a legitimate right. So who can escape this accountability on any level? Not by the Israelis, but also by your government or European government or American government or even some Arab governments nowadays who are more complicit with Israelis than with Palestinians. So
This
it is an
this,
ongoing, unfortunately.
This is a discussion which could take us a long time. I think it's a discussion for a further session. But just watching the time that we're at just now, I know we haven't taken all of the questions. Hopefully we've dealt with the major questions. And thank you again, Abdelfattah, for your passion and your determination to keep things at least moving along with some hope. Can I turn over to Marion now?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Grace, for fielding all of those questions. I'm sure that everyone's had a look at the questions in the chat, and they are all extremely pertinent to what has been going on tonight. So I hope that you've gained a lot from what has been said. Particularly, our guests have been very open and very honest, and I think that the gracious and very informative answers have given us such a lot. I thank you all for joining us. I've asked a bit sneakily if Muriel would say a closing prayer, and I think that she sneaked off there. I can read people doing these things. I'm sure that she prepared herself now. So before we go, could I go over to you, Muriel?
Yes. So I sneakily went and got my book of Corrymeela prayers. This is a prayer by Podrigo Tuma called A Prayer for Reconciliation. Let us pray. Where there is separation, there is pain. And where there is pain, there is a story. And where there is story, there is understanding and misunderstanding, listening and not listening. May we, separated peoples, estranged strangers, unfriended families, divided communities, turn toward each other and turn toward our stories with understanding and listening, with argument and acceptance, with challenge, change, and consolation. Because if God is to be found, God will be found in the space between. Amen.
Amen, and thank you again to Muriel, to Abdelfattah, to Paul for all that they have given us this evening. May our God go with us as we determine to act, not simply to be empathetic. Good night, go in peace.